There's a set of that, a dude who asked the greatest mathematicians today what they thought.
Yeah.
And a few of them, of course, bundled it completely, but there's a few that had beautiful answers.
Yeah.
Like where you could tell, like he was like, I don't want to sound religious, and he wasn't talking about God. It was just, but he was going into like the whole, for him. So, because he was, you know Ramanujan?
No.
Like Ramanujan is that Indian dude who, did you see Good Will Hunting?
Yes.
They talk about it in that movie when the two Robin Williams and what's his name have lunch in that cafe, and he talks about Ramanujan, the Indian dot, not feathers.
Oh yeah.
Right, and so Ramanujan was an Indian guy. It's a fascinating story. He's an Indian guy, and he's gonna discover a basically high school book of math, and out of that, he's gonna come up with 300 theorems that he's going to send to Oxford. I think it was Oxford, one of the to England, and he's sending it to one of the top 3 greatest mathematicians of that time. And the guy emails him back saying, "Who are you again? And where did you get that from?" Out of the 300, 150 already existed, but he deducted those theorems from a book about a high school level book about math. He has no formal training, barely went to school. And he created 3,000 plus theorems, out of which I think maybe 100 were wrong or some shit like that. He proved theorems that they had tried to prove for hundreds and hundreds of years. And he had a few theorems that still we have not proven yet. He was able to advance the field of prime numbers to the stuff. So at the time he was called a crook because he did not explain how he was getting to the results. He just got there. Yeah. He just wrote them down. And he said that he got those results from his family's deity. Like he's Indian, so there's a bunch of them. So his family had one specific deity. She was telling him the results. Yeah. So, but he could do prime number to like in his head, and just so he never write the A B C D.
He wouldn't show his work.
Well, yeah, but he was inside because he never wrote it down. He just knew the answers and everything, and so that's the question: are math discovered or invented?
I'm on team discovered fully.
So am I. Yeah. Honestly,
I think whatever it is we use to represent it are
just numbers.
Just shackled by whatever.
But in a way, that's what God all means. Yeah. Like a theorem cannot be complete and coherent at the same time. You need to be on the meta level for both to happen. Yeah. Right. So, and that's Plato in his way and everything. So yeah, I'm on the discovered as well.
So this is how we wrapped up me trying to pitch Julien one of my favorite conspiracy theories, that Isaac Newton was set up by the Catholic Church to fake gravity because the Earth's flat.
Or to come up with a bullshit answer about gravity.
And then we got into, this is how we set up the podcast, guys.
Yeah.
So
conspiracy goes to, exactly.
Yeah. So we're going to get into a fun one today, though. We've got the basis of what we're going to be getting into for a little bit. Forever,
yeah. Forever, because it changes everything.
We'll tease you. Lactate here, guys.
Yeah.
If you've been listening for a long time, we've touched on the subject of lactate and some of the assumptions made since the beginning of our understanding of it.
Let's say that again.
And now that turns into, you've been doing a fanatical amount of research lately.
I'm tired.
My phone and the StrongFit library is showing the results of that.
And just for fun, go on it, glycolysis, lactate, and read one of them. And what I mean is try to read one of them.
Yeah, it's just not fun reading is the problem.
No, but it's like, oh my God, like I don't know how long it takes the guy to write those papers, but I know how long it takes me to go through the sentence.
Yeah, we've got. But where do we want to start? Should we start with like the fundamental understanding where things got established first?
Well, let me state how big this is first. Okay. So what I'm going to say today, and I want this on record, one day someone will get a Nobel Prize for. And then I'm going to say something else, but toward the end, and then on that, someone will get a Nobel Prize on that as well.
You heard it here first.
I am dead serious and I want it on record. Someone will get a Nobel Prize for this. That's obvious. Like that is obvious.
You think it can be me? Is that,
Yeah.
is this,
Yeah.
listen, guys. Is it a vote thing? Is it a popularity?
Exactly right.
That's how we elect presidents. You know that?
You know when? Yeah, exactly. You know when Einstein was a clerk, so patent firm in Zurich, and he looks, and this is when the world changed, because one guy had suddenly a view of something that was actually far more simple and everything. In a weird way, this is that. I'm not Einstein in the story, but because he's been building up for a while. And so it's actually, as usual, like you stand on the shoulder of giants, right? So Einstein actually furthers some principle from before. A dude will take what I'm going to talk about today and in a way prove it in the biology world, and he will get a Nobel Prize out of that. So what am I talking about? I'm talking about glycolysis. So glycolysis.
Glycolysis? I would go with glycolysis, but I really don't know.
I don't know because it's too Y. So that's my French thing, glycolysis. I'm going to say glycolysis. I think that's what it is.
We'll go with that.
Yeah, I think that's, I'm pretty sure
that's also the French hybrid where it kind of sounds
I can get away with
glycolysis and glycolysis. It's the French version.
I get away with it because it's a French accent.
You're basically saying both.
You said I could be a Bond villain, and I'll agree because I have the accent. So I can be the Bond henchman and the villain at the same time. Because I got both. I got the accent, I have the muscle, and I have the cat.
And you got the cat.
And I got the stare. Yeah. So I'll be the super villain and the henchman. So I'm the Bond super villain. Then there we go.
Well, and Richard just might be handsome enough to be James Bond.
No, he can't beat me, so that doesn't work.
Have there been any? We should better put a petition out there to get
Mexican
Richard,
James Bond.
Get Richard the next James Bond.
You're going to be called racist. I'm just saying.
James Bond doesn't have to be British.
You know who I want James Bond to be the next one?
Who?
Idris Elba.
There was talk. I thought that they were going.
Yeah, I know, but then they didn't.
They didn't.
Oh, it'd be so good.
Yeah.
That dude.
The unreasonably handsome Idris Elba.
Idris Elba. Oh no, him. That's my vote for. Come on, he would kill that. Like he's a Sean Connery.
Yeah.
Type.
Yeah.
Oh, it'd be so good. Anyway, that's my vote. Because he has do you know that he trained to get the 100 fights in Kyokushinkai and everything?
No, not at all.
Yeah. He trained, like seriously, to have like a pro kickboxing fights and do shit like that. Yeah. No. So he's legit trained as a kickboxer. Yeah. Like he made a small stuff on it where you could tell he's training. He's getting his ass kicked. Like this is like legit train, not like Hollywood. I'm gonna learn to box so I can hit you from fucking 2 miles away and look like he did like legit training. I like the dude.
All right.
I like that dude.
Okay, so we got to get back on
glycolysis.
We're talking Nobel Prizes here.
Exactly. Yes, right. Nobel Prizes. So, by the way, on this, there was a Nobel Prize in 1953 for glycolysis. So, what is glycolysis and what's my statement? Glycolysis is the main energy pathway where they tell you that you have glucose, energy substrate, that goes through 10 steps, and at the end, you end up with the end product, which is pyruvate.
Okay.
Right. From pyruvate goes two ways. Aerobically, presence of oxygen, he goes and he feeds mitochondria. Okay. So we know pyruvate is the number one fuel for mitochondria. So cell energy production, all that stuff. Anaerobically, so not in the presence of oxygen, you produce lactate. Right. So that's been discovered in 1940. Right. My statement today is that there is no such thing as aerobic glycolysis, which means pyruvate after and lactate anaerobically. There is not aerobic glycolysis, there is not anaerobic glycolysis, there is only glycolysis, and pyruvate is not the end product, lactate is.
Okay.
So there's only one glycolysis, not two. So, does it matter? Oh my God, yes, so much. It changes everything. First of all, lactate as a waste product is already a major issue, but even if you go that route, it changes everything because that means, for example, for us, there's no aglycolytic training. Then all training is glycolytic. Yeah. Like you don't stop at pyruvate that feeds, that goes toward the cell. That means you can't treat lactate as, the VLMAX training versus the VO2. We have to rewrite all the textbooks. If you go in a textbook this year, glycolysis will be explained as such. It's pyruvate at the end product, and then they split aerobically and anaerobically. What I'm saying is they split aerobically and anaerobically after lactate is produced. Not at the pyruvate level, so not 10 steps, 11 steps. Okay. Lactate is produced aerobically or anaerobically just through the glycolysis, and then aerobically when the aerobic happens at lactate, it goes toward being broken down to pyruvate again to feed the cell. And then when it's in anaerobic form, it just feeds the muscle directly.
Okay.
Right. So now I can go into where did we fuck up and why.
Yeah.
Right. So
the very beginning
right.
of the lactate waste product assumption.
Right. So the problem with all this is lactate as a waste product was 20 years before glycolysis was discovered. Glycolysis was discovered in 1940, but lactate as something was discovered in 1920. To go back, like the guy stuck an electrode into a frog's leg, started to squeeze, and he saw the formation of lactate. So and by the way, there's a bunch of other stuff. Like for example, we saw that more lactate means rigor mortis was actually a lactate formation. Was relating to lactate formation. More lactate, there was more rigor mortis. So therefore, lactate is a waste product. You go there exactly right.
Seems like a lot of dots to connect.
Right, and so with the frog,
in a context, it kind of is not even related to what it does when you're alive.
Right, but yeah, right. Like, so now we start the problem, right?
Yeah.
So 1920, the guy says the leg moves, more lactate is there. Therefore, waste product. Right. Again, the conclusion. So, welcome to science.
Yeah, leg moves is the input. Lactate buildup is the.
Right.
That's
the waste. That's the waste product.
Make a hypothesis.
Right. And so, but the problem, as usual, is the conclusion.
Yeah.
Therefore, it's a waste product. So that's also like end of 19th century, beginning of 20th century, where they had that, I don't know if it's a Victorian era way of looking at science or if it's you cannot separate science from scientists. And the culture of that time was, they were so afraid. This is when religion and science really split.
There was a huge, during that same era, like science was in a big like chemistry culture. Also,
right. Also,
very much so.
Yes,
there was
very much
like remember leading up into World War I and in there World War II is one of the biggest booms.
Yeah.
It's really the foundational boom of all pharmaceutical science.
Yeah. And physics because of weapons and
so there's
like
there's a huge uptick in just that type of scientific.
And I remember evolution.
Yeah.
The latter part of the 19th century, really, in a way, science wins over religion.
Yeah.
When evolution wins. So there's an entire cultural thing there that if you look at the conclusion based from that time, it's almost saying like the body cannot be more than what it looks. Mm-hmm. Like they are very, very careful about saying it like that. And so when you see lactate, you don't look for a meaning. You see waste product. But there was another conclusion that easily could have been taken, is the body is producing fuel. But no, they went from it's a bit like, I guess, like an Occam razor. The simple solution always has to be the right one, except it's bad science. It's just very poorly applied. Yeah. Anyway, so as usual, I've talked about that many times. You have science. You have one dude that says something. Everybody rushes to the flag that he planted, and everybody calculates around there. And so he established that lactate is a waste product. And that's what it is now.
Yeah.
And so when glycolysis happens, for example, 1940, when it's discovered, it was discovered with the idea that lactate is a waste product. So therefore, it cannot be the end product. So therefore, we stop at pyruvate to make it work.
Yeah. And
a lot of stuff goes on like that. So for example, what's very strange is that there's a guy named Holmes, right? A very important dude in 1930 who stated that, for example, the only way the brain, already back then, the brain uses glucose is it has to oxidate it into lactate to use it as fuel. So Holmes in 1930 says two things. Lactate is a fuel for the brain. It's oxidized. So aerobically, glucose is turned into lactate. Nothing. Because lactate was found as a waste product in muscle. And all those dudes are going to... So you have two fields of study on glycolysis. You have muscle and you have the brain. Mm-hmm. Obviously, it's the same shit.
Yeah.
But no, the muscle don't talk to the brain. So that way of looking at the muscle, in a weird way, took over glycolysis of the brain. And as we went on with what is called cerebral glycolysis, which is oxidative, so it's in the presence of oxygen with lactate as a fuel, we never questioned
that.
So eventually we started questioning lactate as a fuel, but we never questioned glycolysis. I'm gonna do back and forth all day. So now we are at the stage, and I'm going to explain the problem with this, but now we are at the stage where we question lactate as a fuel versus a waste product, but we're still not questioning glycolysis end product.
And do you have to, right?
Oh yeah, there's major problems.
So this has been a thing we've talked about with lactate as fuel for a while.
Yes.
And the reason I think that you have had to get to the bottom of this is that because it didn't make sense to you.
Right. There's problems.
Making that statement still means no matter what, like there's something to be rooted out. There's dots to connect it.
Right.
Loops
the second I got into neuroscience, within a month, I was like, wait.
Yeah.
Like this doesn't work. Okay. So for example, at rest, right? Lactate, the brain is a net producer of lactate. Right. So I'm like, okay.
Yeah.
Right. So at rest though. So aerobically, the brain produces lactate. Right. But
so it can happen there.
Right. And it can happen in the presence of oxygen.
Yeah.
I'm like, people?
Yeah.
No? Anybody? And I'm like, this is so fucking weird. And so I start to study more neuroscience, and comes back lactate as fuel, and you just can't get away. By the way, the lactate shuttle theory, which is the beginning of lactate is a fuel, forgot his name, is in 1980. So 40 years ago.
Yeah.
Right. And by the way, these dudes in the 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s have been kept on saying that lactate was most likely a fuel, and it was produced aerobically. So now in neuroscience, they get to a point where, again, we have to say lactate is a fuel. But it's produced aerobically. And yet we're not questioning glycolysis because Nobel Prize 1953. And I'm like, is it not? Am I the only one that find that so fucking weird?
Pivoting everything based on a Nobel Prize 70 years ago, is that any different?
Yeah.
Is that any different than pivoting that whole thing built upon an assumption from a look at a single animal's leg detached from the body?
Right, that doesn't even have the whole fucking but they welcome to the medical world. This is why I think it's engineering and not a science, because that's what you see, culturally speaking, right? Okay, so and so going through the studying, and then I'm gonna explain the problem with glycolysis, like that the idea of aerobic glycolysis faces major issues. You want me to start there? So to explain how absurd this is. Okay.
Yeah.
So what I learned in physics is that nature likes simplicity. Mm-hmm. Usually there's Dirka with a beautiful equation and everything. All right. So I look then at how glycolysis is defined in textbooks. And then if you go the aerobic way, so pyruvate feeding the mitochondria, you end up with a cycle that is incomplete. It cannot produce what is called NAD+. So, you have 10 steps of conversion, but it's missing a very important part in the cycle, which means the cycle cannot be closed. Yeah. It has to be a cycle like this, right? But it cannot be closed because of NAD+. Read the papers, guys. I don't want to start to go into...
It's a real treat.
Oh, it's awesome. I don't want to go into the complication, but basically you're missing a part.
Yeah.
And so the only part where you find this is through anaerobic glycolysis. In aerobic glycolysis, when lactate is being produced with pyruvate, the NAD+ is being released. That you miss in aerobic. So now they have a problem. Mm-hmm. So it exists on anaerobic, doesn't exist in aerobic. So now they're going to come with what is called a MAS, which is a very complicated, convoluted way to create a system to create NAD+. But in that case, if you do that, then you cannot explain why mitochondrial LDH. So there's an entire problem of introducing the MAS to explain something that is missing. They say, see, it works. Yeah, but once you do that, you end up with something within the mitochondria membrane called LDH, which is a lactate, something to decompose the lactate, a number of things. But then there's no reason for it to be there in the membrane, and the MAS could not be produced in the membrane anyway. So you end up with something very convoluted where you go, ooh, like you're patching the holes.
Well, what happens often, you see with a lot of things like this, is when you're trying to just understand something, right? And you try to put these pieces together. You go from, all right, I have this, I have 3 things to observe. And you understand them, and boom, you're like, fuck, okay, now I got 15.
Yeah.
Right. And you're missing a thing, and to fill that gap, you have to add this whole nother layer. and this whole nother and I do believe this is always a difficult dilemma when you get into these types of things. Any type of problem solving, actually, you run into this. I have to increase complexity to understand all the variables. At some point, you may get to just the right layer where all of a sudden it becomes very simple. Right? The whole thing does. Yeah. The problem is, if you are operating on a missed assumption, when you start going out, your deviations get further and further, and all you will do, and I used to call this all the time doing diagnostics, technical and otherwise, is you just get fucking way out in the weeds.
Yes, exactly.
And I would I would sit in there like, man, fuck, and then you just have to go. It just can't be
that exactly.
Like it just doesn't.
It can't be that complex. So that's me looking at glycolysis right now, going like it can't be.
It only does it on the third Saturday of March and February. And by the way, your body was designed.
Do you know what it does when that happens? That shit. That means you're denying evolution.
Yeah.
Because evolution would have found a simpler way to do this.
This wasn't something that was scabbed together.
It's not strong enough. Yeah. It's not strong enough for evolution, that system. So, and that's basically within what we understand of glycolysis, even with the muscle. But then you go into, again, we go toward the brain. And now what you see in the brain is that you see lactate as a fuel. That's pretty much been proven now, you guys. I put all the paper if you want. You put lactate, it's oxidized as fuel. Okay, so that's it. But it's also being produced through glycolysis aerobically. And so now you start reading a little bit more and you discover that that's not the only place where lactate is produced aerobically. Red cells produce lactate aerobically. Okay. Red blood cells, sorry. Yeah. That sounds very communist of me. Red blood cells, the lactate is produced aerobically. The heart muscle cells, aerobic glycolysis. The retina, same thing. So the brain, aerobic glycolysis. And you go but aerobic glycolysis with lactate as an end product, not pyruvate.
So in every instance except the muscle?
It's the skeletal muscles. Okay. And not even all of them. Okay. Only specific stuff. Yeah, so you start to turn into those weird streets where you go, wait. And so instead of doing all that, all you have to do is go, okay, but maybe then the lactate is the end product. What happens if lactate is the end product? Then the NAD plus is being released when pyruvate turns into lactate. And that closes the circle. Yeah. And since you need pyruvate as fuel for mitochondria, it's okay because we know that lactate aerobically can be oxidized back into pyruvate. Yeah. So it works.
Kind of. Yeah.
That's it. Yeah. And then but that's 1940. That's literally 80 years of we are mistaken about glycolysis. So why does it matter if lactate is a waste product versus a fuel? Because people are going to be like, it makes no difference. Okay, so this is something we're doing with women Bart right now. I asked Bart a simple question. You have your athletes, you test them. Yeah, you test them for lactate in the blood. I was like, all right, so tell me something. Take your athletes that are not anxious and take your anxious athletes and tell me on average more or less what they are on lactate, on blood lactate levels. Right, so the non-anxious are about 1.5 millimole. Okay. Right, and I say, what about your anxious people? Well, they more than double. They had 3.3, 3.5. That's interesting. So now, lactate is a waste product. You go, they're stressed, right? That's a waste product that's being created by stress because they're anxious. Right? So they have more lactate. Yeah. Right. So that's a waste product. So what do? You find a way to take away the lactate because it's a waste product. Why would you want to keep it? Yeah. It's bad for you. So let's reduce the amount of lactate amongst anxious people. That makes sense. Yeah. Right. So, but you see that, and I'll explain, but you see that a lot. This is why in the Russian school of thought, in strength and condition, all of it, they say glycolytic training is a bad idea because you're producing waste product. So this actually Pavel Tsatsouline, you say glycolytic training is bad. First of all, so if I'm right, that means it's fundamentally wrong because there's no such thing as a glycolytic training. Yeah. All training is glycolytic. But anyway, if lactate is a fuel, then you have people that are anxious, that have more fuel in their blood. Why would people have more fuel in their blood?
Because they would need to take action. Doesn't that seem like, you know what I mean?
Rolling
around with the diesel in your veins, bro. Right.
So that means anxiety is
a call to action. It's an abundance of lactate and overabundance of fuel. What's the fuel for to do? That's the things we've been talking about forever.
Therefore, anxiety is a call to action.
Yeah. Well, that buttons that up nice. Yeah.
Right. And so why does it matter if it's a waste product or not? When you have brain trauma, right, we know there's massive amount of lactate being released. You go to the emergency room. If it's a waste product, what do? You remove it. Mm-hmm. But what if lactate is a fuel? That actually is more than a fuel. It's also a hormone, and it's also an anti-inflammatory. Then removing it is taking away the capacity of the body to heal. So that's why it matters.
Yeah.
So it goes on and on and on like that. And so I've been at this for a while now, and especially the last few weeks, because now I have to get into the very specific, like all the ions and all that shit. But it goes so much further than that. So, and that's the second part I want to talk about. There is no study between lactate and the nervous system.
I think, you had said there's like literally zero.
There's one that tells you that if you give lactate to anxious people, they get into panic attacks.
That's it.
That's the one we put.
I think there was another one that had said basically that in a study for something, maybe it was a study on lactate, that they basically there are almost no studies indicating the basically lactate and the nervous system. I think in this case it was sympathetic nervous system.
Yeah. There is
in this specific
nothing.
Instance,
and this is where someone will get a Nobel Prize because
and also, isn't that fucking easy?
You would think.
This is easy.
Not if it's a waste product.
Well, but this is easy correlatable data to get.
Not if it's a waste product. But then you're going to have to explain to me, by the way.
Yeah.
But then it's a fuel only for anaerobic conditions anyway. And most conditions are aerobic.
Yeah.
So it's about pyruvate, not lactate. But pyruvate, you never see it. Because it's transformed into lactate.
Interesting.
Right. So you're always stuck. But it goes further. Because actually I'm linking it to the nervous system. So, and that's where someone will get a Nobel Prize on this. That you can quote me on that one as well. So
take notes. It can be you.
Right. There's, I don't want to go too far into this, but there's a support cell in the brain called an astrocyte. It's called astrocyte because it's shaped like a star. Okay. Right. It's a support cell. It's very interesting. It's the only cell that that stores glycogen.
Okay.
I kid you not. It stores glycogen in the brain. Why? To feed glucose to neurons. Right. So let me go into this real fast. So my statement is that glucose and lactate don't compete as a fuel. There is no such thing as glucose as fuel. There is only lactate as fuel. Then, if there's no aerobic and anaerobic, which means when we see glucose being fed to neurons and it disappears because it's processed into lactate, and lactate is oxidized as fuel. So, because if you link glycolysis the way I just did, then it makes sense. But that means that glucose and lactate don't compete as fuel.
Yeah.
There is no such thing as glucose as a fuel. Glucose is only a substrate to lactate. And lactate is the only energy substrate that we have. It goes so far if you go down this road.
So this is where we say leave your arguments below in the comments.
Oh, have fun. Yeah. I'll like the one, please. And
actually, it is a discussion that we should probably start having. Right? You know what I'm saying? Amongst people. Someone should say, well, what about this?
I'm saying that Nobel Prize winners in 53 were wrong.
Yeah.
Of course we should.
Yeah.
If you guys don't react to this, all textbooks right now are saying the opposite of what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Right. But so let's go a bit further. So we have the astrocyte, right? It goes so far. This is insane when you start to go down that road. So the astrocytes are the support cells. So they feel glucose. They're going to be oxidized into lactate to fuel the neurons. So that's a pretty important part, right? You find out that lactate, by the way, this is so good. Lactate is being carried to the different parts of the brain through the MCTs, like they're carriers, right? Those carriers are going to send lactate to different part of the brain where it does different things. Because lactate is not just a fuel. It's way more than that. And so I just want to go with the astrocyte, because after it gets, there's a lot of anagrams and shit like that, and initials and
really long terms.
This one is so good though. And so this is an astrocyte molecule. This is how do I explain that? Astrocyte. So lactate is so in a way the astrocyte will store glycogen to give to start the glycolysis, right? To produce lactate to feed the neurons, right? So what you see through the astrocyte and everything is that lactate allows through the MCT2s and everything to trigger how are we going to get into this? To trigger norepinephrine and the LC. LC is called the locus something. It's a part of the brain, right? That is the main producer of norepinephrine norepinephrine for the body in general. Noradrenaline, if you want. Non-adrenaline, there's a difference between adrenaline and noradrenaline. But it's a matter of receptors and shit like that. So, but what's very interesting is that LC is a hub for the sympathetic nervous system in a way. It controls things like sleep and wake cycles. Okay. It controls like stress tolerance and stuff like that. It controls long-term memory. Very interesting. English speaking, it controls parts of the posture and stuff like that. So there's a relationship between the astrocytes and the norepinephrine and the LC, right? And that is carried through the lactate. So not lactate as an energy fuel. Lactate as something else. Lactate as a neurotransmitter. Yeah. In a way.
And you've mentioned that before.
Yeah.
Right?
That hormone.
That on its own isn't totally new.
No, it's not. Yeah. And it's been known in neuroscience for a while, because that's why if you interest yourself in lactate, you know all that. But the astrocyte, you hear that all the time. It does a lot of things. You hear about that in a lot about depression and stuff like that. So the astrocyte is right, through glutamate and all that stuff, you start to go into norepinephrine, you start to go into the LC, but we know that the lower level of glutamate and norepinephrine is a direct thing with depression. Mm-hmm. This is why the antidepressant is actually, some of them are norepinephrine based. Yeah. And they relate to the LC, right? And so it's called a glutamatergic, something like that.
I'm in the weeds.
Yeah, it gets. This is when you start reading this. I'm like, could you make it simpler, please? Anyway, but it's an entire thing with the astrocytes, right? As using in a way lactate as a neurotransmitter, and you see that with norepinephrine and glutamate having a direct relationship with depression. So then, depression in that sense would be just the brain not working the way it should. Let me put it this way. So now, we see the LC is one of the hubs of the sympathetic nervous system. You can tell from its function, and you can tell because of norepinephrine, right? Which is a version of adrenaline. So the stuff that, makes you go. And it's a center we know it relates to stress. Right. So now, we can decompose the system as usual into producing of energy or economizing energy, saving energy, whatever if you look sympathetic, conservation of energy, I like it. Conservation of energy versus consumption of energy, expenditure of energy, right? So that's sympathetic versus parasympathetic. Parasympathetic is conservation of energy. Sympathetic is expenditure of energy. So now, what is energy? Lactate. Mm-hmm. Not the only energy we can produce, but it is the main form of energy because glycolysis is the main energy pathway. Yeah. Right. So that means that whatever uses the system in place to use lactate belong to the sympathetic side naturally because it's expanding. Not expanding. It's what did I say? So using
that's the energy expenditure.
Expenditure, right? It's expenditure of energy. So going back to norepinephrine and LC, so that kind of starts to tell you where it is. Yeah. And so you could see that depression, for example, we know that it's too much conservation of energy. That's a freeze mode. Mm-hmm. When you go into playing dead. Yeah. That the dorsal vagus nerve, we know that's what depression is. Mm-hmm. So you could see that not having enough lactate is not having enough energy to spend, and that is linked to norepinephrine and glutamate, and depression. So depression would be, even on a molecular level, on a chemical level, would be a lack of energy. Therefore, having a freeze mode, and that's what depression is. Yeah. So how would I change that? By introducing lactate.
So that's going to be what? Like just high lactate training?
Right. So that's more toward the anaerobic, so it's burn the questions.
Will you help clear something up for me then? Yeah. So we've talked that anxiety and depression exist kind of along a spectrum, but not as opposites necessarily, right? That they're not truly opposites.
Not exactly.
But it sounds to me like the solutions are opposite.
Yes.
And I thought maybe it's just my misunderstanding that anxiety or depression were maybe precursors to one another or something.
Yeah.
What would it be? Would it be excessive anxiety would lead to depression?
Right. So no, you can make it super simple.
Yeah.
You start to have fuel, call to action.
Yeah.
Right. You start to have too much fuel. You're spending too much energy. Remember the selfish brain theory. You start to spend too much energy. Then what happens? You have to go into a conservation mode. So you go from massive anxiety when I'm spending too much energy straight to depression.
Yeah.
Because it's a reaction to a dysfunction.
So the pendulum swings.
Right. So and that reminds you of what I talk about somatic errors.
And that's interesting because then the more extreme that error is, I like a pendulum, is that if we're only this far deviated, if you're listening,
then you're functional.
Yeah. You can get from these little slight ranges.
And you know what it's called? It's called, remember, tonic freeze.
Yeah.
That's fine.
Yeah.
But remember somatic error when they start to get when do you get dysfunctional? When the snowball is going downhill and you can't stop it anymore.
Yeah.
And then the pendulum swings.
Yeah. And
so
it's
you could see
a lot of fucking ground.
Yeah. Yes,
okay.
Exactly.
Okay.
So expenditure of energy, anxiety, conservation of energy, depression in a dysfunctional realm. So that's why anxiety can be good because it can be a call to action up to the moment where it goes too far.
Yeah.
So it basically closes the loops from a chemical perspective on everything I was talking about.
Yeah. That's wild.
Right. I want to go to obesity because I can go even further.
I'm going to go further. By the way, this has been blowing my shit up for not even a week.
Yeah, but I go fast when I'm interested. Yeah.
Right. Julien's been using his free time better than some of the rest of us, I think.
Yes. Well, it's a matter of need versus want. But so fat cells, adipocytes, so fat cells that store energy, release lactate.
Okay.
So obese people
I know where
release a lot of lactate at rest. What happens when you have a lot of lactate in your bloodstream at rest?
It's going to be, simply more anxiety. Should be a call to action. So what its biological function is. If you're going to have an abundance of, I'm thinking a lot, if you have an abundance of calories essentially stored on your body, the point would be that we've saved them so you can use them. So that mechanism makes sense to me logically, though I would assume that most of the body was designed with some sort of logic.
Yeah. Right. But it goes further.
Okay.
All right. So let's take that a step further if you go at it logically. I was wrong when I said, because I was going off of studies, because now it makes me read studies under a completely different light.
Yeah.
It's crazy. You know that 90% of glycogen is broken down into lactate?
No.
And I was like, you just made my point for me.
Yeah.
It can't be a waste product.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it's the most inefficient system ever.
It would be a really complicated mess.
Right. Yeah. So you just made my point that lactate is fuel.
Yeah.
Anyway, I said before, going after studies, that lactate blocks lipolysis, the energy using fat as fuel. I was wrong. It's just not the primary fuel source. So that means that it's not that lipolysis is blocked by lactate. It's not that. It's just first we use lactate because lactate is king. Is the number one pathway. It's it's basically the king of the hill.
Yeah.
When lactate cannot be used anymore, lactate threshold, right, pure anaerobic, then you go toward lipolysis because you still need the energy coming in, and you can't have it through lactate. So then you start to use fat as fuel. Then you go toward the fat cells and all that stuff. That's still in the sympathetic reaction. That's when I went into the how can I forget? Yes, I'm so in neuroscience, I forgot my other terms. The melanocortin axis.
Yes.
Remember that? Directly to the fat deposits and everything.
Yeah.
Right. But so now, let's go into obesity as a dysfunction. Right? Sorry. You have so much fat cells, they produce lactate. Right. So that means that it would kind of fight glycolysis in that stage.
Yeah.
So that means that if you were to be, because you're not moving much, right? You're having a lot of glucose, but you're not moving. So, for example, how would I get lactate to the brain where it's fuel and anti-inflammatory and a neurotransmitter and everything? Easiest way would be you produce it in muscle, and we know past a certain, I can't remember what percentage it was, 40 or whatever, it's being sent into the blood.
Mm-hmm.
From the blood, it crosses the blood-brain barrier, goes to the brain. So muscle activation would be a great way to feed the brain.
Yeah.
Right, so that's logical, right?
Mm-hmm.
But if I had a massive amount of fat that produces lactate and releases it and everything, at some point, if that's not my main point of lactate, but if that's the way I would get lactate, then I might be very careful about shutting that off,
Mm-hmm.
about using those fat cells for energy when they're already producing energy through lactate. Why would I get rid of the fat cells then? So you could see that the body could hang on to the fat cells as a source of lactate, which is the king of the hill.
Yeah.
So you could see that when we try to starve obese people, or like the calorie deficient and everything,
when you
take glucose, right?
Yeah.
So you take glucose out of their diet, you take all the carbs. So now they have a vastly less amount of the energy substrate for lactate.
Yeah.
Right.
Because that is the thing you're not arguing, right? Is
I don't know.
Glucose is the
Glucose
energy
is
substrate
for lactate.
Yeah.
There's no question.
Yeah.
My point is that that's all glucose is for.
Yeah.
Is to be turned into lactate, and then lactate is the fuel for everything.
Yeah.
That's what I'm arguing.
Okay.
But you could see how if you diminish the amount of glucose in to get the lactate going, but the fat cells are still producing the lactate, they could be very much willing to hang on to themselves in order to produce the lactate.
Yeah.
So that would kind of go into the route of energy, like calorie deficit, not working that well for obese people. Like the body keeps hanging on to the fat and they can't explain it.
Yeah, yeah. And it may not be that a caloric deficit will mean no progress, but it might be much slower than they think.
Right. And it's just not going anywhere. Right,
yeah.
exactly.
And it may not be coming from where you want it to.
Right, and then they end up in depression because they're not having enough energy, so they go back between anxiety, blah, 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 blah.
Does this tie in also specifically with, like, say, localized fat loss with training and things like that with fuel too? Is there connections to this?
Yes, that was the melanocortin axis.
Similar to melanocortin axis, but is there a lactate? Is there any changes to our understanding of that we need to observe?
Well, it would mean that we're going to go to lactate first.
Okay.
Right, so that means that in order to have localized fat loss, or like to go directly as to fat cells as fuel, you're going to have to go to a stage where you cannot use lactate first. Okay. That means you have to go past the anaerobic threshold.
So you need to, let's talk something very specific.
85% of your heart rate, and so mostly anaerobic.
Okay.
And over 85% of your...
and if we're talking for a specific muscle, I'm assuming, like, let's just say your fucking legs. I don't know. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah,
like
VMO.
So VMO. You're going to do some specific leg press thing or something on it, right? You're going to need to be moderate weight or heavier, I assume.
Heavier, because you have to be really anaerobic. Yeah. So, but the key is going to be like those last 5 reps.
That's where I'm going with, is doing 5 good reps, 10 good reps. That's one thing.
Yeah.
But if you're really looking for fat loss, you need to light your fucking world up
on fire
in that thing.
Yeah.
And that's a thing that I get into sometimes when we talk about this with neoprene and stuff. If someone's having difficulty, it's like no.
It burns, not enough.
Well, you don't just put it on and be like, oh, I did, and like, was it fucking awful? Well, I don't know. Like, no. Like, did you really go there? Like in that place, like
exactly.
And very often the answer is like, well, and then to me that's a fucking hard no.
So
I think that's interesting that drives that. You have a plan. So like if I want my legs to get leaner, maybe I don't need to be cycling for 45 minutes at a time.
On the contrary,
yeah,
that's exactly. And I think that's why we see steady cardio not working nearly as well for fat loss and let's say CrossFit.
Yeah.
CrossFit has worked way better. It's way better than
because you toe that line.
Because you're there.
Yeah.
Right, and so that line becomes very interesting because we know women have a naturally higher body fat percentage than men. Mm-hmm. We also know that men can go into that zone more than women. Like women are really good at the 60 to 80%, but they struggle over 80% of that stuff. And you see body fat percentages there and everything. So what I find interesting also in this is getting leaner, therefore, is the energy expenditure system, which sounds obvious.
Yeah.
So why are we using nutrition for that? What is nutrition for? Getting food in, so energy conservation. So why are we using nutrition to lose weight?
Well, that's interesting. I mean, I guess I would throw a semantics argument, right? Is that nutrition has kind of got us all fucked up, and bad nutrition's a real problem.
Right.
So, like, I get that.
Yes. Fundamentally, it's a wrong conversation.
And that just dialing down the nutrition
it will work at first, but that's not truly
solution.
Again, like he puts the conversation in the wrong.
Don't you think it could put you in a place where you're fucking really stuck then? Because you've then reduced all your nutritional tools via essentially just reduction and food quality, and you get there.
And you're not making progress.
But you have not progressed in the training, and now you're stuck. And you're left with an amount of food intake that's probably unsatisfactory.
Very much so.
You increase a little bit,
and then
you gain fat.
And it's not
enough to fuel good training.
And the only way to see your abs is to starve yourself.
Yeah.
But that's not sustainable because you can't just eat less calories. And so you go back to normal, you get fat, you lose your abs. You do that for 2 months. Then you starve yourself again to see your abs.
Yeah.
And then you have to go back to normal because you can't sustain it because now your whole entire hormonal system, everything is fucked. And remember, in the meantime, lactate production goes to shit. So that means that the brain, everything is fucked in the process anyway. And you keep doing that yo-yo thing just to see your abs for 2 weeks and then you lose and everything because it's the wrong conversation. Mm-hmm. That's not the conversation is that getting lean is energy expenditure happens as an energy, as a process of energy expenditure happens in a sympathetic side, happens through training, happens through producing lactate for many reasons, and then you go past anaerobic threshold to use the fat as fuel, the fat cells as fuel. That's a pure sympathetic reaction.
Yeah.
So anxiety, if I'm right with all this, anxiety would mean Disney December, depression would mean burn the question, which I've been saying from the beginning. So it closes the loop on the chemical side of things.
Yeah.
And that starts with lactate is a fuel, and glycolysis, there is only one glycolysis, and lactate is its prophet.
I dig. What would you like to see out there for data in this regard? Like is there studies you would like to see? If you had to handpick something to be done, what would you check specifically?
For the glycolysis, it's been done already.
Yeah.
So at this stage, it's going to be a debate of ideology.
Can they zoom in even closer and clear this up? Or is it about assumptions where this assumption is required to be made?
I think it's going to go in waves because medical science is not a science. Yeah. It's architecture. And so it's like architecture, it's like it's engineering.
Yeah.
It's engineering. So I see it going at waves, but the arrogance of the medical world, and I say it all the times, man, and especially now that they are the new priests, it's like anytime you touch a textbook, you touch the Bible.
Yeah.
It's fundamentally the culture of the medical world is actually a religious culture. Mm-hmm. And so whenever you say you want to rewrite the Bible, it goes slowly.
Yeah.
And that's what we're talking about there. But the biologist who does it gets a Nobel Prize. Mm-hmm. There's no question. The studies have been there, so I don't know what other stuff you want. Now, when it comes to lactate and the nervous system, then we have to start because there is none. That's the second Nobel Prize. Is the guy that will start to actually go in that route. Yeah. And so, there's many studies you could do. A simple one, first of all. So if we see lactate as a driver and, anxiety as a driver and lactate as a fuel, then the study simple of at rest, you do a test on people for anxiety. Like, they have psychological tests. You give them the test, you have no anxiety. It's not that simple, but you know what I mean. Like you grade everything. Yeah. You get my idea.
Yeah. Using their terms and their scales, give me a 1 to 10.
Right. Exactly. Right. So people 0 to 3 have no anxiety. 6 to 10 have anxiety. Yeah. How about that?
Right? Some patterns would be good to see.
We measure at rest lactate in the blood, and then we see.
Yeah.
And you'll see if I'm right that on the vast majority, because there's always other stuff that are not getting, like did the guy get massive amount of coffee before and stuff like that, but you will see a vast majority. You should see that the levels of lactate in the blood on anxious people are higher at rest than in non-anxious people.
Will this be something, I'm assuming it will be, it's going to be at least highly individualized as far as what a person's, say, standard healthy baseline would be? Because you should kind of be able to go through some of this if that much is done.
Totally.
And be able to say, like apparently your symptoms are lower if you're at a 1. than when you're at a 3.
Obviously.
Now, for somebody else, that might be deficient. And so I'm just thinking,
no,
wow.
for sure. And by the way, plus on top of that, what does that mean, anxiety? It still doesn't mean shit.
And also, what does that mean with your efficiency of being able to use it as fuel? Your demand. There might be more.
It's going to be that too. Yeah. So by the way, when we do that test, we can't put athletes and non-athletes together.
Yeah.
Because they don't produce lactate the same way.
Yeah.
Which brings an interesting question. I don't know.
What is the difference?
Glycolysis is just everybody has it because that's normal stuff.
Yeah.
But it's more your capacity to produce lactate, and that's anaerobic in a sense of the other one. Like, for example, if you have a great cardiovascular system, so a high VO2 max, that means everything is aerobic. You're very good at it. That means you're very good at clearing up the lactate as energy.
Yeah.
Right, so that means you have energy.
Whereas if you're
have a lot of energy.
If you're essentially really deconditioned, that's not going to work.
No, it's going to go. But like, for example, a strength athlete, him is very good at producing, at going past the anaerobic threshold. So he's always have a high. He always has a lot of lactate, if you want. By the way, interestingly speaking, for an hour after exercise, the lactate that was not used, about a quarter of it, is transformed back into glycogen. Because it's a glucose cycle. It's transformed back into glucose to be stored as glycogen.
Interesting.
Yeah, but it's the same cycle, see?
Why? What's the value in that? Is it sits there as that? Is that something?
But because you put the fuel back in the tank.
Yeah. Interesting.
Right.
So then it's just stored.
Yeah, it's about a quarter is stored.
If you had to what's the word? Postulate here. What would be would you want to clear at the end of training? Would you want to have cleared all of your lactate?
Do you want big muscles?
So what do you want?
So if it's full of glycogen, it's rounder. I want my muscles to be rounder.
So finish on your tough, nasty shit and walk out, right?
Wait, walk out because why? Because
is that an issue from an anxiety standpoint? Is it going to be in the blood?
Okay, but that's where I was going. That's where I was going with this. If you're a strength athlete,
sorry guys.
Yeah. There's different form of anxiety. No, but that's where it becomes interesting because that I haven't tested yet. But let's say you have a person that trains but nothing crazy versus a person like a powerlifter or something like that, which means they're really, really good at flirting with anaerobic threshold. They always go there. Like, so they, the capacity to have lactate everywhere is great. That means that most likely you walk around with more lactate in your stuff. So that means great athletes would have more anxiety than regular people in the same conditions.
Yeah.
Like, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So again, but the problem is anxiety, we're putting a negative connotation to it.
Yeah.
But then that brings another point about that. What if it's not a negative? There's only function after all.
Yeah,
what if we misunderstand fundamentally that anxiety is not a negative? The problem is you're fucking lazy.
Yeah.
Make your bed in the morning.
Yeah.
What if, going back to the protocol, what if the problem is not anxiety? The problem is you're supposed to move during the day.
Which is all of this, though. All of this is underpinned by the fact that this system should exist where it's supposed to help us move. That's literally the whole point of the whole fucking thing.
That's the whole point of the whole day.
Yeah.
At night, you go the other way. Yeah. But during the day, you're supposed to move. So Voltron effect, protocol, energy expenditure, lactate. So maybe if you're not anxious, there's something wrong with you.
Yeah. Wild.
And if you're trained all the time, chances are your capacity for energy is there.
Yeah.
So that would bring the point of runners, right? Runners are very good. They produce, but they probably, at some point, you'd be so good at your cardiovascular system that you would continuously use the lactate to build the mitochondria and everything. Yeah, but you're not producing enough lactate, so maybe it's not keeping up.
Yeah.
So maybe that was they were so fucking nervous too, is because they have so much energy and they need to do stuff on it. But on top of it, since there's a relationship between norepinephrine, the lactate, and all the sympathetic, going into a sympathetic state would during the day would allow you to produce the lactate.
Yeah.
Norepinephrine and all that stuff.
So produce kind of
right. So that means
via anxiety.
Right. And if you were to take that in a dysfunctional way, the easiest way would be to fuck up your life.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like you fuck up your life, you're gonna get very angry. Lactate feeds into the stuff, and then you can go into a snowball effect real fast on that as well. And you could see the very high level of anxiety in runners. Yeah. But maybe we're misunderstanding what anxiety, maybe it's not a high level of anxiety, maybe it's a high level of fuel.
Yeah.
Right. But maybe it's dysfunctional because you're fucking up your life to create the fuel because you're not training correctly.
Yeah. So
it's behavior. So it might be, and that all goes back to lactate as a fuel, therefore glycolysis. That way, it changes everything if you look. Because then it closes a loop even on the chemical stuff, which means now I can test.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of studies to be done between lactate and behavior.
So where do we have this discussion at?
Well, I'm talking to Harpa. I'm going to take to Ed too because he's a doctor. And I'm like, dude, you want a Nobel Prize? Let's rock this bitch.
Yeah.
I'm going to call him this week.
Yeah.
And then I'm like, dude, you want a Nobel Prize? How about we start with the first one?
Yeah.
Let's see what you can do.
I dig.
Yeah. And then all the other stuff, we start with level of lactate at rest.
Mm-hmm.
Trained and untrained people, cardio-based people versus strength-based people. And we start to establish like baseline to see who has more as a higher lactate. And does that correlate with the anxiety profile understood into the psychology world?
Lactate testing, generally speaking, is not terribly expensive or time-consuming.
So you need to learn to do it, but that's all.
And there is an abundance of training centers out there.
Mm-hmm. Bart we could start a program with Women Bart where they teach our coaches to test lactate, which means someone comes and they go, you could give them a psychology test, a lactate test, and we know exactly where they sit and what they need to do. Because again, then after anxiety has symptoms like distress tolerance or whatever. Mm-hmm. So that means that you have energy, you don't know how to use it. So distress tolerance, which means you cannot use the energy that you have because the second you feel something, you back off.
Yeah.
Right. So I need to train you to go into distress, to raise your distress tolerance so that you can use the energy that you're producing. And that's why when you do that, you feel less anxious.
Yeah.
No, you just look at all the symptoms of anxiety. Right. Anxiety sensitivity is fear of arousal of anxiety based on symptom, physical, cognition, and social. So that means what? That means incapacity to spend the energy that you have.
Yeah.
Anxiety, distress tolerance, incapacity to spend. Intolerance of uncertainty, incapacity to spend the energy. So anxiety is just your incapacity to spend the energy being created during the day, as it should. So the way to fix anxiety is just to allow you to spend energy. And based on the symptoms that you have, we go there, exposure therapy. Yeah. So the lactate test will tell us exactly how anxious you are, how much energy you have, and the test will tell us where we should focus our stuff. Where is the blockade? Mm-hmm. Where's the blockage? And if we find the blockage, we remove the blockage, you can use the energy, you're not anxious anymore. Depression would be you are refusing to spend energy. All right, let's find out why.
Now,
maybe you're lacking the lactate. You don't have enough fuel.
And this seems to me also it is compelling is that when we talk about simply for anxiety, not about fundamentally what happens with the science and going forward and all of that stuff, but simply with anxiety this is a free thing that's non-pharmaceutical, that is not. You know what I mean? It seems to make some very okay.
By the way, that is the one issue in all that I say.
It's you.
It's you.
Yeah.
It's not the pill. Yeah. It's not your dad. Yes, but at the end, it's you.
Yeah. Very interesting.
But so the ramifications, because again, like if you look at
which makes it hard to compete though with the pill solution. On a fundamental level, from a marketing standpoint.
For marketing, it's a lot harder.
That is a fucking nightmare, man.
And by the way, you know what? It's even worse than that because then we need coaches to do it. It's even worse.
Yeah.
We need trained coaches to do that. But to go back real quick on the astrocytes, and as a...
I was just wondering when you were going to get back to that.
Yeah, exactly, right. It's very important for neuroplasticity.
Okay.
I thought it was very interesting too. Right, and so lactate and neuroplasticity, there's a direct correlation there.
Define neuroplasticity.
You know, it's a very, very nice word that's been used for a while.
Isn't it basically about switching? Is that the selecting brain network? Like
it's part of that, right? It's the capacity of the brain, if you want to function correctly. Like, honestly, is the switching between networks, the going back and forth, the protection of neurons.
Yeah.
You know, like not rejuvenation of neurons, but the protection of the gray matter, all that stuff.
Okay.
The gray matter does degrade because it's all like
that sounds like a word that I would say like Tom Brady when he was talking about the pliability of muscles.
Totally.
Sales pitch. I was like, did you just make that up?
There's always a dude who made it up first. No, it's very easy to sell that way.
Yeah.
But no, so but the fundamental, because I've gone at the depression from the nervous system perspective. This ties in directly to the chemical as to why. Yeah. There seems to be a whole thing with astrocyte, glutamate, and norepinephrine. So we know because norepinephrine and serotonin are literally the two things we use for antidepressants. Mm-hmm. Right, and both of them have a connection to lactate, DLC, and a bunch of stuff like that.
Yeah.
So that ties, it's closing the loop that I was closing on the nervous system. Now it's closing it on the chemical stuff and linking the two together. And those two loops are perfect. And so on the anxiety stuff, like, yeah, there's no question. So in a way, for me, I'm happy because I proved what I surmised on the nervous system through the chemical as well. Mm-hmm. So that is bound to be right then.
Well then.
Yeah.
In the community, let's talk. Right? I mean, at some point you have to be able to answer some questions on this one, right?
Yeah, but now I can. So,
yeah, and we'll do. I think we're gonna do
Q&A. We have to do a Q&A.
We have to do a Q&A. We also need to do a whiteboard talk about this subject as well.
Right. I can go into way more details because there's so much. Yeah. I'll need a big ass whiteboard on this. You're right. We need to do that. So I'll do a whiteboard session on this so I can go into the very technical aspect. Right, I forgot what I wanted to say, but I'll do all that stuff. But this one, right, it relates to lactate is a fuel. That's where everything changes, and lactate as the only end product of glycolysis. You need that to make it work.
Okay. That's the mic drop, right?
Yeah.
All right. So, I think take on the conversation. Those in the community. Share it around for one. I think it's interesting information. It's new concepts fully. I think it's going to. It shouldn't. Frankly, the concept should not upset anybody.
You're wrong.
But
all endurance people will be very upset because I just say aglycolytic training is bullshit. That's the entire base of their system. And second of all the Russian old school, the Pavel Tsatsouline and everything. If I'm right, they're wrong. Like there is no in between on that one.
Yeah.
You have to rewrite all the strength and conditioning
books. Are people always mad
books.
when they're wrong?
Well, did you notice lately the US? I think so.
Yeah, I suppose.
You have to rewrite all the strength and conditioning books. There's a lot of people in the world we know that have written books about energy systems and everything that have to take parts out.
Yeah. Well, time to start getting them erasers out, guys.
On that subject. Yeah, you would have to rewrite. Like Pavel Tsatsouline was on Joe Rogan not so long ago.
Yeah.
And he talked about what is aglycolytic training, that it's bad, and there's no such thing.
I don't want to say shots fired, but shots fired.
With the utmost respect, I love Pavel Tsatsouline. I read his book
I'm not
a long
talking
time ago.
specific.
But
generally, at the whole thing, here it is. This is like the big thing.
The number one,
about it.
honestly, the number one area where I expect people to say fuck off, you don't even know what you're talking about, is the area, the cardio world.
Yeah.
Because this is where this as lactate is the biggest thing. And like try to Google VLMAX and try to find me a way of building VLMAX that does not involve being on a bicycle. Mm-hmm. Try to find me that and you'll see what I mean.
Yeah.
Like this shit, none of this shit is studied. Like we are, but they're so like technical, like, you know, the endurance world, they have those bicycles and they have the mask and they all look so scientific and yet almost nothing is tested. At least I'll give them that. At least they're testing on bicycle and running.
Yeah.
We're not doing
It's better
shit.
than testing on nothing. Yeah.
It's better than us in the strength world.
Yeah.
Because we're not testing for shit.
Yeah.
So the strength and conditioning world is further down the road than the endurance world. I would have no problem saying that. And but it tells you that we are so far behind. So for billions and billions of dollar industry that we have, we are so far behind. Yeah. And we have to write all the books back, all of them. Yeah. Because this changes things at a fundamental level.
Well, nobody reads books anymore. They just open gyms.
Fuck it. Well, don't. And they close CrossFit gyms. They open them and then they close them. Or they de-affiliate them.
Yes. Yep. So
not closing them, but de-affiliating them.
The exodus. So we'll talk about that subject at a different time at some point. But I want to make sure this lactate.
Tyler is so scared of that subject because I want to go at it straight up, and Tyler is like, wait.
Just wait. People
Just
get
wait,
their hatchets, put them
true.
away. We can have a rational conversation. So
can we? I don't think so. But yeah, no, we can.
We can.
I don't think they can.
That's why it's
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, I get it.
Yeah. So, but thanks a lot for listening, everybody. Real quick products. We have the 6-week online course that's up and running. That's essentially Coach's Week, but individualized. Sabotaging me.
No,
just let me get this out. I haven't even got these things.
Okay.
You know, by the way, this money goes to you.
No,
Come on, man.
I'm the one paying the bill.
The 6-week online course, the functional integration training template, and Julien's 101 nutrition and training coaching. All that stuff is at strongfit.com. You can also find equipment at strongfitequipment.com or .eu. I think that's like the main products we sell. Membership area of YouTube. Julien, what do you want to subvert today?
I could have like a new product where it's like for €5 I have to answer the question and stuff like that. So I say the most outrageous shit and then I charge per question answered.
So there's a mechanism for this that technically you can do on YouTube.
There is?
Called the super chat.
No way.
Yeah, but I think it's only
you can charge per question.
I think it's only for during Q&As, during live streams. I'd have to double check. But there is
okay. I thought the idea was funny, but you can actually do it.
Yeah, I know some podcasts that will do that because they'll have huge members only Q&As.
Yeah,
like 3-hour, 4-hour streams. But even then, there's so many members on them that it's too convoluted. So then only super chat. It's like you start creating.
That's going to be my new way to make money. It's like I'm going to supercharge your comments. You're going to have to pay me for me to answer. There you go.
So if you want an incomplete and probably rude and short answer, you can just message me directly for free.
Oh, mine will be short and rude as well. Just pay for it.
So thanks a lot for listening, everybody, and we'll see you in a couple days.
All those papers are on the StrongFit library.
Yep, there's a whole lactate session there, actually. So we created that. We've put what we have for upfront content in the classroom section. So there's lactate, there's a classroom, and a reading list.
Right. So there's 3 papers. There's 2 of them I know by title that say lactate is the end product of glycolysis. I suggest you read both papers. One is on the history of that and goes very, very deeply into the history. The second one goes into why it has to be more. And then there's the science and translation of the shuttle theory that explains the same ideas as well. So we have 3 papers that really put the stamp on the idea. Yeah.
One more thing. For any of our French-speaking audience, I have added the StrongFit in French section. If you will.
I swear I would never do it, but okay.
But what's been happening is we have a few old Q&As. But you've been on a few French podcasts lately that have gone.
You're telling me?
Yeah,
it's exhausting.
But we have kind of a fair amount of Julien speaking French, and I think it's just easier for us to have it in one place.
You know that I've never listened to myself speaking French.
Maybe don't.
I'm pretty sure.
I have to listen to myself speak English on here all the time.
Yeah, but at least I have a French accent.
I'm not super into it.
My problem is I have a French accent when I speak English, but I'm pretty sure I have an American accent when I speak French.
Yeah, you say the French version of like y'all.
Well, sometimes I say English word with a French accent, thinking they're French. And people look at me like, what? I'm like, shit, that wasn't French now, was it? Yeah.
Well, Julien says words to me where I'm like, did you just say a French word right now?
Yeah, but most of the time they're actually English. You just didn't know, that's all.
Well, I got a pretty good grasp on the accent at this point.
Yes.
But anyway, so there is also a section StrongFit Library under for as much French stuff. But I would ask for help because I've been kind of combing to see, but it's not the easiest thing in the world. So if you are a French listener and you know of anything Julien's been on, email it to me at tyler@strongfit.com and I'll get it added to the library. Yeah.
I don't even know.
I've done some creative language-based search stuff on Google.
Is the main one. Yeah. But I've done a few lately. But that's,
and those are the ones I'm not positive that I have. So if you have any stuff, Julien talking French, hit me up. So
3 of them. Yeah.
Now we'll see you next week. Bye.